inviting me to talk to you. So I'm going to talk about writing for law reviews. Journals are sometimes called law reviews. It's the North American way of referring to them, but it's increasingly being used over here as well. Or law journals. It's the same thing. However, on the whole, student law reviews are law reviews rather than law journals. It's the terminology that's used. And I'm going to run through a few of the things I think you need to think about before you start, or before you decide whether you're going to start writing for a law review, and take you through the process a little bit as well. So the initial considerations, I've done a brief handout, which hopefully you've got. If not, there are a few spares at the front, which goes through some of this. You don't have to print off the PowerPoint. So start with who, what, why and how. Relatively obvious, but you do need to be very clear on these things when it's a law review or a law journal article. It's a very competitive process, writing for a law journal. It takes me a year to write a law journal article. That's how long I expect, yeah, exactly. That's how long I expect to take. Now, that's not all I'm doing, of course. I'm also teaching, I'm also marking, I'm going to conferences, and I'm doing the next stage of my research. But I plan a year's worth of work for a journal article. Now, I'm not suggesting you necessarily spend that long, but you need to think of it in those terms. It's something that will take time. You don't necessarily spend a lot of time each week, but you need elapsed time. It's not something that you can just say, right, I'm setting aside a fortnight, and I'm going to cane it, and I'm going to get it done that way. Because you actually need time to think, mature your ideas, check things as well as obviously get the writing done. So before you start, it's worth working your way through these. Who? So who is your primary audience? Who are you writing for? Are you writing for students with the hope that some academics will also read it? Students hoping that some legal practitioners will also read it? Is your primary audience academics, the bar, solicitors, legal executives? Who are you writing for? Because you will write each of those quite differently. So you need to be clear, who are you writing for? Or are you trying to write for somebody else? You may be writing for other people. You may be aiming at law reform. So you may be aiming at politicians or the Law Commission. There are lots of different audiences, but you need to be clear on what you think your primary audience is. So that's the first thing. Now, this one is really very important with law review articles. Are you aiming at a domestic market or an international market? If you're aiming at an international market, you're going to need to explain all the background to, for example, the system in England and Wales. People won't necessarily know that. They may be experts in the field in Australia, but relative novices in terms of the domestic audience, in terms of the England and Wales side. If you're writing for the domestic audience, you giving all this background, this is how the courts work, this is what the law is pointless. Because the people who are going to look at this when they review, it's like, yeah, we know this. How does this help any of us? We know it. So you need to pitch it very differently, domestic or international. And you need to research your audience and the types of things they read, because when you start writing, it's well worth having a law review in mind. So write for a publication. Now, they may not accept it and you may need to take it somewhere else, but it's well worth actually writing, thinking, I'm going to try and place this in legal ethics. I'm going to try and place this in the Queen Mary Student Law Review. I'm trying to place this in the Westminster Law Review. You need to know where you're aiming at, because each review has a different feel about it. And if you want to maximise your chances of being accepted, then it's well worth working out where and writing for that audience first. Second thing, what? What things do you want your audience to know and to take away having read your article? A journal article is not you showing what you know. That's not the point. It's not like an essay. It's not like you writing to show off your intellect and your research. It's you communicating something new to the audience, which you think they need to know about. So you need to be clear, what's the message? What have I learnt, which I think they also don't know? which I will then try and communicate to them. A journal article, a law review article, has to add to the sum of knowledge. It has to make a new point. You cannot be telling people stuff they already know. You won't get published. That isn't the point of a journal. Now, that might be the point of a blog. It might be the point of a short piece in a practitioner journal. But the point of a law review article is to communicate something new that experts don't know already. So you're aiming at that level. And that's the experts reading that particular journal. So if you think, well, I'm not going to come up with something that academics in this field or practitioners in this field don't know, fine. Don't aim for the journals they're reading. Aim for one where your audience won't know what you're trying to communicate, or won't know all of what you're trying to communicate. So again, that feeds into the who as well as the what. My own view, if you break down and analyse law review journal articles, which, of a Saturday evening I do on occasion, because I have nothing better to do, you find out that usually there are only 3 to 5 main messages that can be transmitted. Most law reviews are going to expect you to write around about, if a student one, 6,000 to 8,000 probably, academic 8,000 to 10,000 words. And I think you can probably only really communicate 3 to 5 main issues or themes well, because you need depth. This is not about breadth, because you're communicating something new, so you've got to come up with something new. So I think 3 to 5 main themes is all you can manage in that space, to be honest. So who and what. Also, of course, you've got why and how. Why is it important that the audience knows these things? They have to have a reason to read it. We're all busy. Unless you're set reading, which you absolutely know you have to do, let's face it, many of you won't do it. You're not going to sit down and think, do you know what, I've got a spare couple of hours, I'll maybe just read this article and just see where it takes me. Some of you will, but a lot of you won't. So think about it. They're feeling the same way about your article. So what is it that's so important that this audience needs to know, so that they actually put in the hour and a half, 2 hours to read your article? No point in writing it if nobody's going to read it. So why is it important? What have you learned which is important to communicate? Obviously, as I say, it has to be new. There has to be some new angle, new element. That will help you to define how you go about writing and how you're going to communicate your findings. And I think it is worth having a really good think before you get down to this. Does it need to be a journal article? It may be. This is a law review, a journal article that you're doing. It may not be. It may actually be better as an article in a practitioner journal, new law journal piece, much shorter. Maybe that's the way to communicate your idea. Maybe that's how you get your point across to your audience. Maybe it's in the law section of a quality newspaper, either online or a paper publication, a blog, a legal blog, or another mechanism. So think carefully, is this really a 8 to 10,000 word article, or have I really got 2,500 words worth of material, which it would be better if I just communicated that a different way? Or do you start with a short one and then build up to a larger one, for example? So I think you need to work your way through those issues. Now, a typical academic journal article, and student law reviews sometimes work with this, and sometimes they scale it down to 6,000. Looks a bit like this. Okay, so the introduction is probably 500 to 800 words, no more than 1,000. Then you've got your themes in the main body. Each of the themes is probably going to be somewhere between just over 1,000 and 2,500 words, depending on how many themes you're communicating. So each one's going to be almost a mini essay in itself. And then you've got a conclusion of 500 to 1,000 words. If you look at any of the law review articles, you'll find that they broadly fall into this sort of anatomy. Now, the introduction is the background to your study, and I think it's important that you think of your article as a study. This is the culmination of a study that you have conducted. This is the background. Why this topic? Why this issue? Why this study? There's a reason. It's usually a problem. In my experience, most people study something where they think, well, this isn't working. I don't think this is appropriate. I think there's an issue here that needs to be dealt with. If so, get all of that down and write it right at the beginning. Now, okay, you're going to play around with it at a later time, but nonetheless, it is important that you work out what's the background. Why am I moved to do this topic, this question? What is it? So that's the background. Your conclusion is relatively self-evident. You're pulling together all of these strands here to ensure that, with luck, you have fully answered the question that you've set yourself, and you've explained to your audience what they need to take away with them at the end of this. So you've got your takeaway at the end. These are the messages, these are the messages, these are the messages. And I'm going to come on to this in a minute. Once you've worked this out, you need to be then signposting it right at the beginning. So a strong journal article knows its conclusion at the beginning, and the reader knows at the beginning what is the conclusion. So it's a strong essay, so it's a strong dissertation, but nonetheless, strong article. So it's an iterative process. You will write, review, redraft, write, review, redraft, and you will keep going round in a relatively circular motion. So at the end, by the time I get to the conclusion, there should be absolutely no surprise. But it should all feel to beautifully come together. So I think, yeah, of course, it's blindly obvious. Why didn't I think of that before? Why hadn't I thought of that before? It was obvious from the beginning, but it just all coalesces at the end. So you need to, as I say, you need to be clear, once you've got your conclusion, how you signpost it. You will signpost it all the way through. Now, most of you are involved in the Bar Society, and you'll know a good advocate does exactly the same. It's exactly the same process. A good advocate does not leave the key messages until the end. You're bringing them in from the beginning, because if there's a jury, you want the jury to be clear on where you're going to take them through the evidence. And if it's a judge, you've basically said, right, this is the conclusion, this is where we stand. Right, now I'm going to take you through it, and I'll show you how I got there. Okay, so the introduction may contain a basic discussion of the previous academic research in the area. So it may include that. Sometimes referred to as a brief literature review. That's what a literature review is. It's a review of the previous academic research on the area, as well as introduce the issues to be discussed later. Okay, so it'll probably be including that. In other journal articles, you'll find that they skip that. They actually deal with that later on as the first main theme of the main body, but they explain the background to your article and to provide the anatomy of what's going to come next. So right, we're going to deal with this, then this, then this, then this. So everyone's clear, right, we've got to deal with these issues as we go through. And as I've said, once you've written your article, you will need to redraft the introduction, because it will need to reflect what comes after it. I don't write introductions at the beginning. I sketch out the main themes I think I'm going to write about, but I don't tend to write introductions at the beginning. I just find I have to redraft them so much, it's quite a waste of effort for me to do a proper introduction, write the rest of it, and then go back and completely rewrite the introduction. But for some people, it's an important part of the process to try and help them think through what they're going to write about. Now, the difference from most of the work that you will have done previously is that in many articles there will be a method section following the introduction, and the method section is basically there to set out how you conducted your study. So again, think of this as a study. How did you carry it out? If you are publishing in a student law review, and it is a law review, you don't need to explain in any detail if you've been using cases and statutes. If you've done standard legal analysis, you can simply mention it and move on. That's not a problem. If you are publishing in a student journal, but it doesn't principally have a legal audience, you will need to explain the legal mode of research. And even if it's a student law review and you have done something slightly different, you've interviewed people, or you've drawn upon policy documents, not just legal documents, you will need to explain your method. Sometimes you'll have subheadings that say methodology section, sometimes it's method. It will depend on the journal, but be prepared, you may need to justify your study method early on. And then the rest of the main body is very, very similar to pieces of narrative work that you've done previously, because of course it's going to be split into paragraphs, it's not going to be split any other way, but you should be organising the main body thematically, on the whole, thematically. So it shouldn't be chronological, it should be thematic. So what you don't want to do is describe the material. This is what happened, then this is what happened, then this is what happened, then this is what happened. Instead, you want to pull out the strands, the themes, and go with each of the themes, whatever they are, rather than describing cases over time. Okay. And as I've said, the conclusion, in many respects, should write itself. Because at the end of each of the themes in your main body, you should have a mini conclusion. So at the end of a theme, you should conclude that theme. At the end of the next theme, conclude that theme, and so you continue. So what I tend to do is I tend to take each of those mini conclusions, literally cut and paste them into the main conclusion, and then start redrafting them, so that I know I have included elements of all of the themes. And I do a complete redraft. But I know that I have addressed each of the issues. Okay. Now, there are a number of things that you need to think about in terms of the research and writing process, and then the submission to law review and the process that your article, draft article, will go through from there. The first thing is that you think you need a lot of evidence in terms of your standard essays. Double it. Double it for a journal article. So every single sentence in the main body, if it isn't introducing the issue you're going to discuss or concluding, is going to need to be evidenced. You're going to need footnotes or endnotes, depending on how the journal is set up. And evidence is, as we've said many times before, it's something that you are either quoting, so that could be statistics, someone's words, or something that you are paraphrasing. Statistics, words, ideas, legislation, all of that's evidence. It's all evidence. None of that's yours. It's not yours. It's not your material. It's material you found to use, but it's not your material, it's evidence. A good journal article will have a strong emphasis on analysis. Analysis being you, your bit. So what are you adding to this debate on each of those points? What is your conclusion on the basis of what you've found, on the basis of what you've read, on the basis of what you've seen? Yeah.
So I guess it's what you're addressing to the question. For example, are juries necessary? It's the first, basically your introduction is what you're addressing the introduction.
Yeah. Well, basically, analysis is, are juries necessary? Well, the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to go away and you're going to actually look and see what other people think, or what you can find. And you will find statistics on juries and how many cases and how many convict and how many don't. So you've got that pool of evidence. You've got academics and practitioners who have views. Some of them evidence, some of them personal. That's evidence. None of that's yours. That's all somebody else's. None of that. So most of the stuff that you call research is evidence. Because you found something somewhere. Hasn't come to you. You went and found something that somebody else has done. Yeah?
Yes.
All of that's evidence. Now, that's when you start getting to say, and what does it mean? What can you make this mean? And that's the bit where you have to get your brain in gear and think, so come on then, how can I use this? And the product of the how can I use this and working through it is your analysis. But you simply writing up all the stuff you found is just you describing your evidence base. That's all that is. It's just evidence. Now, you need evidence, so it's useful to have, but if what you're doing in your journal article is presenting all the evidence, I'm going to say it isn't an article at all. Thanks ever so much for going and finding the evidence for me. Very helpful. And now I'm going to work out what I think this means, and I'm going to structure this into themes. And then I'm going to write an article on the basis of your evidence base. So it's switching. It's switching from the notion of I found this stuff and I'm writing it up. And that's what many law students do. They find stuff and they write it up. And they say, look, I've got all this stuff. This is my essay. To which the answer is, no, it's not your essay. That's your description of other people's findings. And what are you going to do with it?
So basically the article is your views, and your views that influence other people to change their views, and you backed it by all the evidence that you've mentioned.
That's all analysis is.
Really, not forwards.
Analysis is opinion. But the difference between standard opinion and analysis is standard opinion is this is what I'm saying down the pub, or this is what I'm saying to my mate off the top of my head, versus I can prove it. And here is my evidence. Now, come on, if you think you've got evidence to knock me down, you go for it. But that's the difference. So analysis is only ever opinion. It's just it's scholarly, evidenced opinion, expert analysis. That's what it is. And so when we talk about analysis, that's what we mean. It's what have you done with this? So you have to first of all describe your evidence. Most of us have to do that. You read a book, you look at some statistics, and you have to jot down, you have to describe what they have said. That's your description. Then you need to pause and think, and what does this mean in relation to my study? And that's when you start developing your analysis. And then you have to redraft what you've written. Because this lot shouldn't really be the main bit. A lot of this will be in your footnotes or your endnotes. I don't want to see all of this. I don't want the whole thing to be your evidence base. I want you to start off by explaining what you found, what you personally have worked out that you think I need to know. And then you're going to say, and by the way, here is my evidence, which shows you that I have got an expert opinion as opposed to a off the top of my head view. So you need to redraft each paragraph. And you need to do it with all of your academic work, but it's exactly the same process. And so those of you who did public law with me at some point in the dim and distant past and ended up doing the outline essay and hated it, I know you all hate it. It's this. It's trying to get you to engage with this. Analysis in the middle. Go back. Analysis in the middle. Evidence in the footnotes. It's trying to start you on because you all come in and want to describe your evidence. It's what you all want to do. And that's because that's what you've been taught to do. It's what I was taught to do. We were all taught to do it. You find something in a book, you write it up. You find some statistics, you write it up. That's what we're taught to do. But all we're doing is describing evidence. The higher level cognitive skills, which we expect at higher education level, particularly at the high end of higher education level, is and this means, ta-da, I've used this to formulate a scholarly opinion. And I'm now going to explain my opinion, my scholarly analysis to you, but show you as the backup, the evidence, which demonstrates that I have a solid opinion, a solid set of analysis. If you go into court and you listen to good advocates, good barristers, and they're not all. It is recording, isn't it? Yeah, well, they aren't all. Sorry. If you go in, you will see that they naturally do this. They naturally give you the analysis, and then they back it up with the evidence, as evidenced by the case of. And when I said in the first year to many of you, don't start a sentence with a case, don't start a sentence with legislation, I wasn't just being difficult. All of that's your evidence. It's a very weak argument as an advocate. Because if you've got a judge, or particularly a jury, and you start off with, in the case of blah, they're thinking, okay, I'm getting a law lesson here about cases. And their brain's ticking away thinking, what's it mean, what's it mean, what's it mean? Why are you telling me this? Okay, we're going to get somewhere in a minute. And then, as the whole jury are doing that, tick, 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 they're not listening to you as you're saying, and the importance of this, ladies and gentlemen, is it means my client, whatever it is, didn't do whatever it was that they're being accused of, or you're prosecuting them for. That's gone, because at this point everyone else is disappearing off trying to make sense of the evidence that you've handed, because that's how the brain works. Hand somebody evidence and then they start thinking, oh, what does that mean, what does that mean, what does that mean? They're not listening. They're trying to work it through. So, the strong advocate, the strong writer, starts with the analysis. This is what you need to know. This is the point I need you to take away. So the person's listening at that point, and then you say, and here's my evidence. But they're already analysing the evidence through the point you want them to take away, as opposed to trying to come to their own conclusion about the evidence, which unfortunately may be radically different from yours. So your strong advocates are going to do it the other way around. This is what I've concluded. A paragraph starts effectively with, this is what I've concluded, phrased in a different way. Middle bit is and here's the explanation of my evidence, and then the conclusion is, and this is why I need you to know this. So conclusion, evidence, why I need you to know this. Every single paragraph. And if you can do that, it will be the strongest argument you can make. Now, our brains don't work like that when we start thinking things through, because we start from evidence, because we have to. So you need to think of writing as a process which you keep going round. It's iterative. So you will have to describe your evidence first, then you'll work out what it means, and then you will redraft each paragraph. And for many of you, when you feel, well, I've done all this beautiful, research, and I haven't really quite managed to reach the level of marks I've wanted, or I don't feel it's quite hung together as it should have done. Chances are you stopped one draft short. What you didn't do is go back round the cycle again. It's just as the advocate who hasn't prepared quite as well as they could have done. They've got everything they need. It's just they then go in and blow it by saying, and I've got this, and here's a knife, and I'm going to explain to you the importance of the knife in this murder case. Everyone thinks it's a knife, that's right, it's a large knife. I wouldn't want to be confronted with that knife. They're all off down there. What you needed them to know was, your client's fingerprints weren't on the knife. Somebody else's were. But of course, by now, they're all thinking about this knife. And their brains are thinking, I wonder, do you think that looks like a Marks and Spencer knife? I've got one of those at home. But people do it. I mean, you're all doing it now. I witter on, and your minds will go off somewhere else briefly. If I can get you with the point right at the beginning, and then your mind drifts, so be it. If I leave the point until you're thinking it's a Marks and Spencer knife, I've lost you. Exactly the same in writing, exactly the same as a strong advocate. Okay? So, you will usually describe what you found, which is effectively you describing your evidence, then work out what it means, and then work out why it's important, and then you will redraft. Okay, so, you write an article, or you're thinking of writing an article. I would always, my advice always is, and I mentor early career academics in terms of journal article writing as well. That's one of my roles here and elsewhere. And I always say, have a good idea before you finish your first draft which journal you are planning to submit to, firstly, and what they want. Now that's what they want in terms of content, but also what they want in terms of style. And it's not just about style, because style leads to changes in substance as well. So, are they looking for Oxford footnotes, or Scholar, or Harvard and endnotes and references? What are they looking for? Check. It will always say on the website. There will be something. Yeah.
What you're referencing? What one is that? It's
I do.
For Harvard.
Oxford.
So is it Oscar?
Yeah, Oscola, Oxford, yeah. Oscola is basically the Oxford legal version. So you need to know which one you're doing, because it can take quite a long time just faffing around redoing this later on. It's pointless if you can get away with doing it properly first time round. You need to know length, because when you're planning it out at the beginning, are we looking at 5,000, 6,000, 8,000, 10,000? It does make quite a big difference. Is the length inclusive of footnotes, references? Not. Do they want a bibliography? Don't they? You need to know all of these things as early as you can in the process. Please make sure you comply with the style guidelines. And one of the major reasons for articles being rejected without being read, this. Don't comply. People are doing this in their free time. People are reviewing journal articles in their free time. It will take them a long, long time to do it. If they post on their website, this is what we want, you send them something else, they'll just send it back. It will be a complete waste of time and energy for you and for them. So make sure you do comply. Some journals will want subheadings, some won't. Some won't care. If it remains silent on the point, assume you've got a free hand. If not, please do comply with it. Never submit anything that you do not believe to be fully completed, polished, finished. Never, ever, ever do that. Firstly, it's really disrespectful to the people who are reading it. If I get something and I look at it, because I'm a journal reviewer for a number of academic articles, and it comes through to me, and it's not been properly finished, I write a scathing, it's a scathing review, and it gets sent back. Which is I am going to spend 5 hours reading your article. I don't get paid for it, fair enough. I've got other things to be doing, and you send me a half-finished, oh, well, it's reasonable. No. So make sure it's finished. You have to be convinced in your own mind this is a finished draft. Now, the other thing to bear in mind as well, and I always suggest to people, when you're looking for somewhere to publish, have a look at the back issues of the journal. They usually have 1 or 2 back issues on their website. Have a look, because if they've just published something quite similar in content to yours, even the best article you can write is not going to make it in. Because they're not going to want to keep publishing very similar articles. On the other hand, it works in your favour if you look through the back issues and you realise the last few issues, they've not published anything on your area. So you might want to just check that out. And also try to come up with a catchy title. Now, the title needs to describe the content, obviously. There's no point putting a title where everyone looks at it and thinks, I haven't a clue what that's about. I therefore won't read it. But if you have a nice, catchy subtitle to it, you're more likely to get it read. So it's well worth thinking about titles. So you send it off. Hopefully you've complied with all of this. You're thinking, thank goodness for that, I've got this off my desk finally, I've put a lot of effort into it, and you send it off. What happens next will depend a bit on the journal. So, some journals will guarantee a first response within 6 weeks. For some it will be a lot longer than that. Bearing in mind people are trying to fit it in amongst everything else they're doing. Sometimes there is an initial review stage before subsequent ones. So for some journals, the editor, the senior editor, will read everything first. So for some they'll do that. And then they'll decide whether they're sending it on to reviewers, additional reviewers. For others, they will just automatically send out to other reviewers. Most journals review anonymously, which means your name will be redacted. It will have been Tipexed out, or usually it will have been deleted. They may ask you not to put your name on the manuscript. Now, as a student writing, or as a junior academic writing, people probably won't know your writing style well enough to be able to work out it's you. When you get more senior, it becomes more difficult because everybody knows what you're doing, and therefore they know it's you, even though you're not supposed to know it's you. It does mean if it's anonymous, on the whole, you're not getting personal issues coming into it when people are reviewing. Most articles will be reviewed by at least 2 people. That might be an editor and another, or it might be 2 members of the review team. You will generally get very detailed feedback. Very detailed feedback. It will also generally be incredibly critical. It seems to be the way it is. Now, it shouldn't be horribly personal. I mean, academics can be horribly personal with other academics. That happens an awful lot. You think you get bad feedback, you should see what we get. Make your hair curl. Student law reviews, generally speaking, shouldn't work like that. It should be constructive. There's no point sending out really nasty feedback, and I don't countenance that unless people are just sending me something that they haven't finished. I don't think it's helpful. Having said that, they may well need you to do fundamental rewrites, even if they accept the article. So whilst you send it off and hope that you're going to get a positive response back, it is incredibly rare that you will get a thank you ever so much, it's excellent. It will be appearing in the June issue. Much more likely it's going to come back, and usually there are 3 possible responses. 1 is, very sorry, no. 2 is, no, but if you were to do these things, you could resubmit it and we would reconsider it afresh. 3, third response is, yes, we're very interested, but we would need you to make some changes. It's not a resubmission, but you will need to make the changes and then send it back to us, and we'll have a quick look through it. In terms of the proportion of articles ending up in those 3 categories, the majority will go into the no. The next largest group will go into the no, but if you make major changes along the lines we suggested and you resubmit it, we'll have another look. You can resubmit, and a very small proportion will be yes, but. So I would say expect detailed and critical feedback, and when you get it, there's always that moment of, but everyone gets it. It's what you come to learn. Expect to have to make major changes, and if you don't have to, you'll feel pleasantly surprised. It will help it. It will be a better article. I have not yet had an article that I've written. It's always improved it. Even when I've looked, because I often get the sorts of journals I send articles off to, there are often 3 responses. There's usually one that says this is really good, really like it, really love the writing style, could probably do with a few changes. Then there's one that's a bit, it's fine. Yeah, interesting enough. I think it's worth publishing. And then there's usually another one that says, hate the writing style. I'm thinking, love it, hate it. This is going to be difficult to try and square. I wouldn't have done it like this, to which the response is, well, no, you wouldn't, because you didn't write it. So you've got 3. And then I spend the next 6 weeks thinking, I wonder if that was Bill. I bet it was Bill. And then going along to conferences and seeing Bill, saying, hello there, how are you? Fine, how are you? Okay. Academic game. I reckon that, and then somebody else saying, no, I don't think it was Bill. Who do you think it was then? You have a look. Who do you think wrote this review? I'm going to trip them up next time I see them. So, it's rare to get glowing feedback from all your reviewers. It should be constructive. So expect to have to make major changes. If you don't have to, that's terrific. I have to say, if you're going to embark upon it, expect to spend months and months on an article. That doesn't necessarily mean spending a lot of time each week on it, but you will need time to keep maturing your ideas. So don't start it thinking, I'll just get this done in a couple of weeks' time, because it's unlikely to be of the right level if you do that. If you can, terrific. And for many of us, we will have a no. It will, many of us will send something off to a journal and they'll say, thanks ever so much, but not really our cup of tea. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad article. It may mean your research about the most appropriate journal wasn't as good as it could have been. I mean, when I have junior academics coming to me and saying, I've just had this letter and it's, this email and it's a no, and I say, well, where did you send it? And then you look at it and think, well, to be honest, it would be a no, wouldn't it? Yours is on this topic, and we know that they major on that topic. They are not going to take it. This is not about the quality of your article. This is about fit. It's got to be the sort of thing they will publish. Sometimes it's a no because actually they just published something similar, so they don't want to have another one. Sometimes it's a no because you got somebody on a bad day and they're not interested. Fine. Don't give up. That's where people get hobbled, and I understand why they do. And when I've had things rejected, I've sat there and thought, all that work, it's obviously awful. Well, no, it's obviously just they don't want it. Their problem. Okay, fine. Pick yourself up, see if you can work out who reviewed it. Get a couple of big mates and find somewhere else. I've never yet not got an article placed. But sometimes the first place isn't the right place. You just picked the wrong one. It's a bit like boyfriends and girlfriends, really. The first one isn't necessarily the right one. You can try and screen out. You can do a bit better screening next time before you do. But it's the same with this. Please don't give up. It's right now. If you get if you get a really big kick and you think, oh no, this is awful, get someone else to look at it. Get someone to look at it and read it through and say, look, is this really as bad as I think it is? And pick that person carefully, obviously. The chances are they'll end up seeing something that you didn't spot. I would always get somebody to read an article before I sent it off. I always will. I always get somebody on the faculty or somebody I know quite well outside in a different faculty and I say, look, would you mind just having a read through this? What do you think? Well, it is a bit awkward when they say, well, there's some good stuff in it. Say, right. Would it be quicker for you to tell me what the good stuff is or what needs changing? But it is well worth it because you get so into these things that in the end it makes sense to you, but it may not make sense to them. So the review process, I think, it's an important one. It does improve articles. People do see weaknesses in your arguments. People will hopefully say, why do you always start your sentences with the second clause? Now, I was not aware I did this. I found this out as a relatively junior academic. So, if da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, comma, then, blah. See, once it was pointed out to me, I was looking through, okay, I now did it there. Why do I do that? What a silly way of doing it. Well, that's how your brain works. So if this, then what? Oh, then this. That's how our brain works. But how our brain works and how we write it down in our first draft is not where we need to finish. Once you've done that, you've worked out the if and the then, you take the then, put it at the beginning, and get rid of the if. You can change the sentence structure around, again, to give you a stronger sentence. It's a bit like evidence and analysis. Start with your conclusion, then provide your backup, not the other way around. I was on time. So, we're going to take some questions very quickly. Anybody who wants to, before the drink. So.
Yeah, I was just wondering what your thoughts are on gathering empirical evidence.
Well, I have a number of thoughts. Gathering empirical evidence beyond case and statute, because basically analysing cases and statutes is a form of empirical research. It's just that it's the material we're most familiar with as lawyers. You can collect data from all sorts of other places. You can interview, you can observe, you can use different forms of documents. All of those are other empirical sources. You could do surveys. I think there are a number of things that are very important if you do choose to do that. One, you need to know the method. You can't just go and interview a few people. You can't just do a survey. You can't just go and watch something. You actually need to receive some methods training, or you need to read up on the methods associated with it. Now, some people will already have done a social science degree and will have that background, others won't. But you can't afford to just go and do a bit of stuff and then write it up. it trips people up in terms of that. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you're a student at a university or an academic at a university, there's probably an ethics committee you're going to have to go through for approval. Because if you're doing any research that involves human subjects, meaning you are going to talk to people, you're going to observe people, you're going to survey people, then you're bound by the university, and all universities are the same, University Code of Conduct on research involving human subjects. That means that you're going to need to draft up and fill in an ethics form. You'll probably get sent to somebody like me to talk to about it, but there are a few of us who are empiricists. And you'll have to submit that to the ethics committee for approval before you can begin doing any of that kind of research. That's the same whether you're doing a dissertation, whether you're doing a thesis, or whether you're doing research for an article. And so you need to be sufficiently organised up front to have time to get the ethics approval before you then embark upon it. So it's not that you shouldn't consider doing other empirical work, but you're always safer with documents than you are going out and engaging with people, because you're going to need ethics approval and you're going to need a recognised method in terms of collection of data and analysis of data. Yeah, I mean, I do that kind of work. There are a few of us here who do. So we have expertise in the university, but it's important that it's done properly. Yeah.
And how do you approach the planning stage when you're writing a journal article, in terms of you've got your research and then in collating it and writing a coherent, actually helpful plan before you write the actual article without writing too much of what you're then actually going to write?
Yeah. I suppose I look for themes. So I do look for themes. What I tend to do is I tend to write up to describe, if it's a completely new area I'm working on as opposed to one where I already know an awful lot about it, I would tend to describe my evidence base, and in describing my evidence base I actually write out, I mean I tend to have a system where I write everything out, or type everything out, and I put things in square brackets, so anything I think about as I'm writing up the evidence, I actually stick in square brackets, because I know that's mine. Everything else I've paraphrased, or I'm quoting, or whatever. And so if I have a thought of, well, I wonder if it means this, I write, I wonder if it means this. Or if I think, well, does that fall into this sort of a theme, I write that. So I end up with quite a long document, a Word document. Then what I do is I tend to print it, but you don't have to. I tend to print it off, and I tend to go down and put marginal handwritten notes in every time I see a theme. And after a while, you start to see themes cropping up all over the place. They're the same things coming round and round and round. And then what I do is I get hold of I go back into the document and I put in subheadings for those themes, and I literally cut and paste all the material under the appropriate theme. And some of that material will come up twice or three times because it will be relevant to each of the themes. And then after that, I write round it all and go away and do a bit more research to see, is there anything else I can find? Now I know my themes. Is there anything else out there which I could conceivably use as evidence for these themes? And do I need to amend the themes? Because it may be now I'm looking for them, I realise there's a lot of evidence against what I thought originally, which I hadn't realised was there because I wasn't really focusing on those themes. So for me, it's an iterative process, and I have to say that's the way that I teach my PhD students to write, because they're aiming at 80 to 100,000 words over 3 years. So my view is you have to describe, because if it's new to you, you can't do anything other. You need to note down any insights you have, because the chances are the insights you have, even at the beginning, are going to have relevance. And you don't want to lose them. Thinking, I'll note those down later is hopeless. They go. You know, the idea comes into your head when you're describing something, and then it's gone. So you need to note it. And then there's a point when you need to just stop, even for a bit, read it all through, and then start to develop. It's a form of grounded theory, but you start to develop the themes that are coming through and rewrite, and then backfill research to see whether you're right or not, to check. That's the most successful from my point of view. I do know other people who do it differently, but they tend to postpone the writing phase, and instead of writing, they will talk, they will dictate, and listen back to tapes of themselves, or audio files. And I know other people who write longhand. And so they choose to actually write longhand until such time, because they think that helps their brain to think a little bit differently. And then after that, they then use that as the basis to start writing. But I don't think there is a perfect way of doing it. I think you actually do have to go through the description phase in order to get to the analysis.
So it's a process as opposed to just a definitive, this is my plan, I'm going to
Yeah.
work from that and write the...
I've never managed that.
No, okay.
And the more I've done of it, the more I've come to the conclusion that it's not a deficiency, it's just the way cognitively many of our brains work. Because you've got to make the connections in your head, and the only way to actually get the connections made is to start working through the description. And then you think, oh, there's an insight, and you note it down. I just don't think it's possible to just get those insights there. I think it's a myth.
Yeah.
And if you talk to very senior QCs and say, does this just come? No. I mean, that's the clever bit. The clever bit is making it look as if it just came to you in a flash. It doesn't. It's all hard work, behind the scenes, and then you sort of magnificently stand there and say, oh, of course, I've just had this wonderful thought. Yeah. Yes.
Given that as an academic you would write typically about 10,000 words over a 12-week period,
Yeah.
What would a typical student be expected to do if they were to write a journal for a university article?
Well, when I say that I would typically write a journal article during the course of a year, obviously I'm writing other things as well, but in terms of a journal article, I would work on the principle. I mean, if I'm writing a textbook, I'm probably writing 300,000 words at the same time. It's just that so it's not so much about the quantity. I think it's how long it takes you to filter this through and to keep going around the process. And I do know people who can short-circuit it and do it over a quicker period. They're probably doing less other stuff, so they just decided that this is the one thing they're writing. So I think it is possible. And I try and get my sort of junior academic mentees to spend, one term doing the sort of first draft research phase and description, then to move on to term 2 to start trying to make the links and themes and come up with what then looks like a proper article in first draft, and then it's possible to to work on it. Now, in terms of most of you aren't going to be able to spend that amount of time in terms of elapsed time, and I would say that most of us get most of our spade work done over the summer in terms of articles, and that will be the same, I imagine, for most of you, insofar as you never want to be sacrificing your coursework and your prep for exams in order to be able to get an article done, unless you think you're a shoo-in for first anyway, and frankly you don't need to spend it. I just don't think it's worthwhile. So I would say that when I get sort of masters or PhD students to start writing, I would say around about the April time, when they're thinking I've got exams coming up, say, well, just get into your head, just start mulling over the sorts of things you might find interesting to write about, because you can just let that can tick away, and then once you've got exams out of the way and coursework out of the way, and you've had a bit of you have actually laid down in a darkened room for a bit or gone off and done something more interesting, why don't you then try to put together, and I do say, even if it's a journal article, it's worth putting together a proposal. So you actually do almost a one-page, this is the title I'm sort of thinking of course it's going to change. And I would do a title as a question rather than as a straight title at that point. This is sort of the basic sketch of why I think I need to write this, background in terms of the content. And just try and bolt that down. The actual research phase in the library, you could probably get done in a couple of weeks, to be honest. That's not the hard bit, as long as you're systematic. It's then how much time are you prepared to spend reading through that and making the descriptive notes, knowing what your title is, because of course you only want to make the notes you need to make in order to be able to answer your title, rather than just making notes on 8 books and goodness knows how many articles. So I think you can probably get, and indeed I know people who have got, a first basic draft done in a few months, and then sort of some help with the next phase. So I mean, it's entirely doable, and I would say the summer's probably the best time to do it. Now, for other people, however, I would say you might already have something that you can start amending and augmenting. That's always going to be a better option if you can. If you have a dissertation that you could rework, or if you're actually doing research on a dissertation which you can then have in your mind, I will be aiming to publish this. It will need to be reworked. You can't just go out and publish a dissertation. You need to actually rework it for the audience that you're aiming at. But of course you've already done a lot of the spade work and you've probably got yourself quite close to a first draft. And so you can, in the matter of, you could rework a dissertation in a month to get it off to a publisher, or to a journal. That's no problem at all. So it's, are you starting from a standing start, or have you got something that you can then work on further? And I think it's, that's going to make a big difference. Any other questions? Yeah.
I have more like a practical question. Is there a database or a website where we can find all the law reviews and what topics they are dealing with?
Short answer, no. There are databases of journals, but there aren't databases in the UK of all of the student law journals as well. And there are a number of them springing up now, because historically we haven't actually had them in Britain to the same extent as somewhere like the US or Canada, and we're now starting to build them. I think they're a jolly good idea. My advice would be that Cardiff does have an index of legal periodicals, the University of Cardiff. So you can have a look through that. But then after that, what you'll need to do is to do a quick Google Scholar search and stick in student law review or just law review and see what comes up. And that should come up with names of them. So I think that's well worth doing. Yeah. And one of the questions I was actually asked earlier on today was, somebody came to say, should I come along to this talk? So I don't know. If you want to, yes. If you don't, don't. Up to you. So, well, why would I want to write a journal article? To which the answer is, I don't know. Why would you? I think it is a question you need to ask yourself. There are lots of benefits of getting something published, so there are very good reasons to get something published, as long as you're prepared to go all the way through and keep going with it to get something published. For those of you who are thinking of embarking upon a career at the bar, it might be one way to distinguish yourself from your fellow competitors, because evidence that you managed to publish something in a law journal tends to suggest that you have tenacity, you're prepared to work on something that doesn't have an immediate reward for you. It also shows a certain level of intelligence and commitment and an ability to think a bit more creatively, because you're obviously trading on your analysis. So that's one reason to do it. For those of you who are thinking of going on and doing a master's, it's very good training. Those of you who are doing masters, it's very good training in terms of improving your written style so that you can profit from master's level education. And it could be a good way also of publishing a master's thesis as well. For those of you who are thinking of an academic career, which is now absolutely essential, if we're honest, academics, I know many of you won't see it, but academics probably only spend about a third of their time on teaching. And the higher you go, the less time you're supposed to be spending teaching. Publishing is a whole part of an academic career. I'm supposed to spend at least half my time on writing and research. That's what I'm supposed to spend. So it's absolutely essential as an academic, because it's about generating new knowledge. It's about trying to get new ideas out there. It's about trying to influence. It's about trying to assist. It's about trying to help, in the case of a law academic, with law reform, with policy development, and with practitioners. And many practitioners who are operating at quite a high level would say, I go to the journals. It gives me an idea about how I can angle new case law. I can try and mould it, because I can take an idea and I can use it, and it can, in some circumstances, be quoted in court, and quoted in the highest court. Something like Stephanie Roberts' work has been quoted in what is now the Supreme Court, the House of Lords. So, I mean, it does happen. So if you are thinking of an academic career, the sooner that you can get something published, the easier your ride will be going through. And these days we don't take academic staff who haven't got something published, even at the lowest level. So it's become somewhat essential. So I think you need to think about, is it worth spending the time on? Is it going to get you to go somewhere? For some people it's, I want to be able to say I've had something published. Well, that's perfectly legitimate reason, but you might find an easier place to publish in than a law review. If you just want to get published, if that's your real motivation, you might want to find somewhere else to publish rather than putting yourself through a relatively bruising review. Okay. Anyone got any further questions? Most of you are wilting. It's quite hot in here.
All right, well, thank you for coming.